So before we get into today's video, I just wanted to really quickly say, it doesn't matter if you have a Predator, a Tillotson, a Wildcat, a Honda, a leaf fan engine. This hobby is one of the funnest hobbies I've ever been a part of, and you can learn so much by doing so. This video, or any of our videos, are not to attack any manufacturers, any dealers. This is just the facts that we found out in our shop with our dyno. We know that things are costing a lot of money. People are barely scraping by, and to be able to spend money on a go-kart and a hobby like this is very expensive. So we want to help you guys make the best possible decision you can when you're spending your money on this hobby. And that's the only thing our videos are about. It's to tell you what these parts are doing, what these engines are doing, and help you decide at the end of the day what is the best way to spend your money. And we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you at the end. What is happening, guys? I'm Greg with Red Beard's Garage, and today we're going to be talking about engines. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Wildcat 223cc engine from EC Carburetors. We're going to be going through all the benefits of this engine and helping you decide if this is the right engine for you to build for your next go-kart or mini bike. We're going to also be comparing it to the old staple on our channel, which was the Tillotson 212E. This was our go-to engine for years, and now you're going to notice that we're not going to really be using this engine really at all unless we have one lying around that we're just trying to get off the shelf, because the Wildcat 223 is going to be its new replacement and the engine we move forward with on our dyno series and on builds in the future on our channel. So we're going to break down why is this engine better than Predators and Tillotsons alike, why we chose to go with this engine, and go through all of its features and show you the benefits. So right off the back is the side cover. The side cover has a 7th bolt down on the bottom side of the side cover, and this is huge because it's going to give you a lot of strength to the block. Now if we look at any Predator or Tillotson, they use the standard 6 bolts. Now the good thing about this side cover is if you have an old billet ARC side cover for a Hemi Predator, it will bolt right on the Wildcat 223 engine. That's what's awesome about it. You don't have to use that 7th bolt, so you can use parts you have sitting on the shelf and save a little money. But EC does make a billet side cover for the Wildcat that does use that 7th bolt, and it's going to give you that much more strength in this block. So that's one big advantage right off the bat. Also, it has a lot more webbing on top and bottom of the jug, and what this means is, if you're not familiar with it, is it has a lot more casted in to strengthen the jug on this engine. So when you get to a higher horsepower build, that's when both these things are going to come into effect. The strength of the jug and that extra bolt on the side cover is going to give the block a lot of rigidity and help it from cracking or breaking when you get to 9,000 RPM, you know, over 20 horsepower builds. That's when it's going to really shine. Now the 212E does have some webbing on top of the jug, but it has none on the bottom side. So that's where you're going to get the benefits of the strength difference between the Wildcat 223 and the Tillotson. And if we compare it to Predators, Predators don't have any extra webbing on the jug, and it doesn't have that extra bolt. So it's significantly stronger than the Predators line of engines. Now, of course, one big thing is 223 versus 212. You're getting more cc's out of the Wildcat, and that is done by the 58mm crankshaft. Crankshaft has more length to it, and that's giving you that extra cc's. One big benefit to this Wildcat 223 is also with that 58mm crankshaft, you also have a flat top piston, where in the Tillotson, you're going to get a dish piston with valve release. You're not going to have that on a Wildcat. So most people spend the money on a flat top after they bought a Tillotson or certain Predators. You're not going to have to do that with a Wildcat because it comes factory with a flat top, and it was designed to have a flat top in it from the get-go. So that's huge, just saving money in the long run. You already have the parts that you would be replacing on other blocks already inside this Wildcat 223. Now, one thing about the 58mm crankshaft that I will say, if you're using older style cams, you may run into problems with the compression release hitting the crankshaft. Now, EC does have some cams that have the low profile compression release built onto them, so you won't have a clearance problem. And they also sell pre-clearance crankshafts that they've machined to go ahead and clear the standard style cams with the old style compression release. They have a full write-up on their website telling you how to clearance for this problem. And a lot of you may be having this problem and don't even realize it, that you're getting contact with the compression release. But some of these engines do have a problem there. We'll be discussing that and breaking that down all in a future video, but they do sell a crankshaft that's already pre-clearance for that. Another thing is the block is clearance already for a billet rod, where when we built a 224 Predator, we noticed that the rod was hitting the top of the block and we had to do some clearancing. And clearancing always sucks because you're disassembling the entire engine. You're having to make a lot of metal scrap inside the block, and then you got to basically clean out the entire block. So EC made sure that you could clear their billet rod in this block without having to do any kind of clearancing, and that's huge because that's going to make builds quicker in the future. So the Tillotson 212E is a Ducar block. The Ducar 212 has been out for a long time, and that's basically what the 212E Tillotson is. Now, if you have a Ghost engine from Harbor Freight, it's the exact same engine as this 212E. It just has a few little differences. So the difference with the Ghost was it was made for the racing car world, and it has a 6,100 RPM governor built inside the coil. So there's no mechanical governor to the Ghost engine. So it still has a cast flywheel on it. And you always hear us say it, if you're going to remove the governor, you need to do a rod and a flywheel. The biggest thing is the flywheel. What is unsafe about the flywheel is the magnet that sends signal to the coil. The problem with it is it has a really low quality screw and it's glued on. That is not going to hold that on in high RPMs. Now, some companies will say that the Tillotson 212 has a 10,000 RPM rated flywheel stock on it. You should not believe that statement because this is a cast flywheel. They've done nothing to strengthen that magnet on the flywheel, which is the dangerous part of this flywheel. And they're rating it at 10,000 RPMs because in the factory, I'm assuming in China, how they're testing this flywheel that's on this Tillotson is they're running it at 10,000 RPMs for a few seconds. And that's not qualifying this as a 10,000 RPM flywheel. When other manufacturers test their flywheels, they run them, if they're certifying it for 10,000 RPMs, they run it at 17,000 RPMs for an hour to make sure it doesn't fail. And that's how they get their certification. This has no certification saying that it's truly a 10,000 RPM flywheel, and you're taking your own safety at risk by running this thing without a governor. We say it's not about a money thing. It's basically your safety is not worth losing a leg over on a go-kart or a mini bike because your flywheel is slinging apart. Spend the money if you're doing the performance parts and buy a billet or the aluminum flywheel because safety is nothing to play with. So this has a standard flywheel just like the 223. EC's not claiming that they have some magical flywheel that's rated for 10,000 RPM. You're going to want to switch out this flywheel when you get in higher horsepower builds and removing the governor. It's a have-to thing on these engines. Please listen to us, take your safety into consideration and replace that flywheel with any kind of modifications. So when we're talking about horsepower, a lot of companies will say that the Tillotson 212 is a 10 horsepower engine, and this is false, and we've never claimed that on our channel. People has asked us that question time and time again, and we've always said it's a claimed 10 horsepower engine. We have a dyno for ourselves, and we do a lot of work in the back end to make sure we're giving you guys accurate numbers. We're not inflating our numbers because we have nothing to gain at the end of the day by inflating our numbers. We give you as true as we can possibly give them. Whether you believe that or not, that's what we're trying to do. This is not a 10 horsepower engine. It's not a 9 horsepower engine. With some parts, it is that, but out of the box, you're not going to see that. These engines are going to be really close in power, but we should see more torque out of the 223 because of the stroker setup that it has in it. They should be really similar when we throw these on the dyno, which we will be doing at the end of this video to see what performs better. Now, we know no one's going to keep these two engines in stock form. They're going to want to upgrade them, of course, because that's what we do in this hobby. So we want to know what is the upgradability of this 223cc engine, because that's a big thing when a new engine comes on the market. A lot of people are scared of it because our performance manufacturers making parts for it. So we're going to break down what parts fits this engine. You may have a lot of parts already sitting on the shelf left over from old builds that you can slap on the 223 right off the bat. Almost all the parts are interchangeable with this, so we are going to break down that as well. So this is not, I'm finally saying it on the channel out loud, this is not a 10 or a 9 horsepower engine. The Ghost made like 9.5 on our dyno, and that's with a 6,100 RPM rev limiter, and that has a cheap PZ 22 millimeter carb, and that also has a little bit higher lift on the cam in the Ghost engine. The Ghost engine is a very mild built engine right out of the box is what you're getting. Is it worth the money? I don't think so. I would rather put my money into something like this where you have more CCs and you have a lot more headroom, a lot more block strength. You're getting a lot of engine for the price. And like I said, at the end, we're going to break down dollar per horsepower and see what is better stock for stock of all the engines. Even if this isn't the best dollar per horsepower, I think you're going to see that this is a clear winner in our book by the end of this video. So when we're talking about the valve train in this engine, it does have a 27 millimeter intake and a 25 millimeter exhaust valve with 5 millimeter stems. Now, engines vary from 5mm stems to 5.5mm stems, and this one does have the 5mm stems, which is the smaller ones, and it also has the split retainers. The split retainers are significantly better than the old style retainers that normally come on the 5.5mm stems. The big deal about the stem size is you have less weight in the valve train. When you start doing the math behind it, when this valve in this engine is spinning at 9,000 RPM, it's almost as if it weighs 300 pounds. So it makes a lot of difference getting that little bit of weight off the valve stem, and then having the automotive style split keepers is huge for strength and reliability in the future in those higher RPM builds. So when we talk about valve train, we already got a big jump because of the lighter valves. Like I said, the 27mm intake, 25mm exhaust. It's got a really good setup for power. This also has a 20cc combustion chamber on this engine, which is a huge factor. The smaller the combustion chamber, the more compression you're going to get out of the engine. That's why you see billet heads with an 18cc or a 14cc combustion chamber, and people also weld up their heads, remachine them to get the combustion chamber as small as possible, because that's all going to equal up to more compression at the end of the day. So we're looking at a 20cc combustion chamber on the 223cc Wildcat. One big thing is this has an all metal stock cam in it. And when we built the 224 Max Performance Predator, we noticed it had a plastic cam. A lot of companies are doing this now. I don't know if it's a wear item or it knocks down on sound or the reason that they go with it. But if you're wanting to run this thing stock for a long time, I would rather not have a plastic cam gear, because if it did fail, you could ruin a lot of other parts. This does have an all metal standard cam factory in the block. So now we're going to talk about what parts fit the Wildcat 223 engine. Now, when it goes to cams, any clone or Hemi Predator cam will fit in the Wildcat 223. So if you already have a Hemi or Honda clone cam, the journals are the same size. You can use it in the Wildcat 223. So that's a big advantage. When we talk about the rod, this does have the same rod as a Honda clone or a 196cc rod. So it has the same journal on the crankshaft and the piston. But since this is a stroker, EC does have a billet rod that is longer and that puts the piston 0 in the hole. And that is huge because you're getting more compression out of that. So you're going to go from around 8.5 to 1 to 10 to 1 compression just by putting a billet rod. And that's going to equal more power at the end of the day out of this engine. If you're wanting to look at putting a different head on the Wildcat engine, great for porting up in the future. So it is small stock, but most people are going to be porting these heads because that's where you're going to get the biggest performance gain. Also, you might notice that the Wildcat has a round exhaust port. A lot of people ask, does the standard D-shaped exhaust port flanges work on this engine? And it does. If you do want a port match, you can, but you can bolt a standard Predator or Honda clone header right onto this engine. It doesn't matter because it has that round exhaust port. Now, when we're talking about rockers, this does use the same rockers as a Hemi Predator, but it's not going to use the same as a Tillotson. Tillotson kind of have their own rocker setup that's different from this Wildcat engine. So it does have a really good head that can flow a lot in the future, but most people, when they're getting into high horsepower builds, they do swap to the non-Hemi head because there's a lot more to gain in those heads in the long run. You can get a lot more lift and don't have to worry about valve to piston clearance as much. You can do more with valve springs because you are limited on Hemi style heads, how much you can drop the valve spring in the pocket. All in all, you're going to for stock. what did we find out? I got a cheat sheet right here with all the stock engines that we've dynoed. So it breaks down at the end of the day. We're going to start with a Predator 212cc engine. You can see on screen that the Predator 212 made 6.74 horsepower, 8.40 foot-pounds of torque, and this price is $150, not on sale. We're looking at the non-sale prices of these engines. So when we break that down, that's $22.25 per horsepower that you're paying for, and $17.85 per foot-pounds of torque. So when we go up to a 224, which would be the next step up from a 212 Predator, the max performance made a little under 1 horsepower more than the Predator 212, and it made a few foot-pounds of torque more. So it's definitely a better engine at $180. So we're paying about $2 more per horsepower than the 212, and we're the same on foot-pounds of torque actually. So that breaks down pretty close. So when it comes to a 212 versus a 224 Predator, we're at the same price on foot-pounds of torque per dollar, and we're a little bit more expensive on the 224 in horsepower, which we expect because it is a little bit bigger engine. But then when we jump up to the Ghost, it gets a lot different. So as we stated in this video, the Ghost is a Ducar block and engine, same as a Tillotson. A Ghost is basically a little bit hot version of a Tillotson. That's what it breaks down to. But you're going to pay for those factory performance parts and the engineering that went behind the Ghost and stuff like that. So it made 9.9 horsepower on our dyno, and it made 11.61 foot-pounds of torque. We expect that because the Ghost does have a little bit hotter cam. It has a 6,100 RPM governor that's built inside the coil, and it also comes with a round slide carb, the PZ22. So that's going to, of course, help that engine perform better. It was made to perform better. But when we look at the price at $330, that's what we've been preaching it on our channel. It's not really that good of a value unless you're scared to work on one of these engines. If you don't want to get inside the engine, the Ghost is a really good option at the end of the day. But at $33.33 per horsepower, the price is kind of up there, and then $28.42 per foot-pounds of torque. So it gets a little bit expensive. Now, I know to put those parts in an engine would cost a little bit more, so it makes sense that the Ghost is a little bit more expensive, but you can do these parts for really cheap on your own. You can buy knockoff carbs for the Ghost engine, or if you started with something like a 224 or a 212, you can buy that PZ kit for really cheap. You can remove the governor. If you're using a 224, you do have to upgrade the valve springs if you're wanting to run higher RPMs, but you can buy a really cheap hot cam and put in it, or you could just port the head up and remove the governor, put some valve springs and a flywheel, then you could be probably more than the Ghost. The head's where you're going to make most of your horsepower. So when we get to the Tillotson 212E that we tested today, and we have not tested a 225 Tillotson on our dyno. The Tillotson 212E made 7.02, so it made less than a 224, of course, which we expected that. So basically the Tillotson is number 4 out of the 5 engines we tested, 1 being the best, 5 being the worst. It made 9.11 foot-pounds of torque on our dyno. The price for this engine is $240, and that's where this kind of gets a little cloudy. The price per horsepower that you're getting for this Tillotson, mind you, the Ghost has a reason for having a higher dollar per horsepower and dollar per torque, of course. It's a performance engine. Has a little bit hotter cam, that governor, and the carburetor. So it has more of a reason to be that expensive. But the Tillotson was the most expensive dollar per horsepower that you can buy. It was $34.18 per horsepower, and it was $26.34 per foot-pounds of torque. It's cheaper on the torque side, but more expensive on the horsepower side by quite a bit, especially when we look at something like a 212. You can't really beat the price of a 212. Harbor Freight brings in so many of those, you're never going to beat the price of them. They kind of corner the market. But what we really need to look at is all the benefits of the block that you're going with and the reason you would want to go with that. So at the end of the day, the 212 Predator is the best value when you're looking at dollars. But when you look at what you're getting for that value, it's not. We truly believe the Wildcat 223 is that. So the Wildcat made 7.74 horsepower, and that is 3/4 of a horsepower more than this Tillotson. It made 10.20 foot-pounds of torque. That is 1 foot-pound more than the Tillotson made. And this cost $180. Now the website, like EC Carburetor's website, does say this is on sale, but that's actually the price. They was going to raise the price, but they looked at the market and thought the $180 price point is the price that this engine is going to stay at. So even though it says it's on sale, it's not. It was, but that's what it's staying at, basically. So dollar per horsepower, we're at $23.25 versus the $34.18. We're at $17.64 versus $26.34. We look at all these numbers, the Wildcat is the cheapest dollar per foot-pounds of torque that you can buy on the market of the engines we tested. In horsepower, it is number 2. Number 1, of course, being that Predator 212. You can't beat their price. You can't beat that value of that engine. But again, when we look at the webbing on the block, it has it on upper and lower parts of the jug. It comes with a better flowing head. This comes with the 7 bolts in the side cover. It has a pre-clearance block. It has all these things going for it. So this, in our opinion, hands down is the best engine for you to build that we've tested so far. That don't mean that something won't come out later that could beat this, but as of today, what we've tested, what we've seen in our shop, this Wildcat is the go-to engine that we're going to do in our shop and move forward with the dyno. So we'd like you to let us know what you think about this video by commenting below. Check out the links. We have all these engines located down there. We have a bunch of parts that we're about to use on this Wildcat 223. And we'll be dynoing stuff like the Tillotson later with performance parts to start comparing what happens once you get to a higher stage on these engines and see how they vary, you know, when you start throwing money at them. But again, I want to say one more time that this video wasn't to attack any brands. It wasn't to attack any manufacturers, any dealers. This is just to state the facts that we found. That's the reason we got a $12,000 dyno in our shop, was to give you guys true numbers. Because someone can say something at the end of the day, but without proof bringing forward, their word might not mean anything. And we want our word to mean the most to you guys, because you are coming to us for our opinions, our knowledge that we've gained over the years, and we want to give you guys the best possible answer that we can. We're always learning in this hobby just like everybody else, and give you guys the most perfect numbers that we can give you. And that's what this series is about. Again, no hate. We don't want people trashing other people in the comments and stuff. It's not what this is about. This is just the hard facts and the hard numbers. You can't argue with proof. And that's what I feel like we've done today, is show you all the proof on all these engines and what is the best. So comment, let us know what engine you would go forward with. What do you think will be your next engine if you're buying it? And what do you think of the Wildcat 223? It's new to our channel, but everything we've seen and the R&D that went behind it is just pretty awesome in the small block world, and we can't wait to get to making more horsepower with this engine. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your trust, your support over the years. We just hit 400,000 subscribers, and I want to say thank you so much for supporting us and letting us live out this dream. It is unbelievable that we're able to do this, and it's a huge thanks to you guys and a massive thanks to God and what He's done in my life. We thank you so much. We love you guys. We say God bless, and we'll see you on the next one.